I realized at dinner that a marriage can be killed by one sentence, if it's said loud enough and in the right company. The Harbor Club wasn't built for eating, it was built for display. Warm light polished the wood until it looked expensive. Soft jazz floated somewhere above us, the kind that never interrupts power conversations. Glasses were so thin, they felt nervous in your hand, like they knew one wrong move could shatter everything. People here didn't talk. They performed. Every sentence sounded like it had been rehearsed for a quote in tomorrow's paper. Mallory loved places like this. Her smile worked here, like a credit card. One swipe and doors opened. She walked half a step ahead of me as if I wasn't her husband, but an accessory. Sometimes she squeezed my hand. Not for me, for the image, for her parents. Deirdre and Glenn were already seated by the window. Deirdre sat perfectly straight, like a woman who had spent her entire life winning small battles and never apologizing for them. Her hair was immaculate, her expression calm, in a way that meant control, not peace. Glenn was different, quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke and let other people hang themselves with their own words. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked, patient. "Well, finally," Deirdre said, as if we were late to court. "Traffic," Mallory replied sweetly, without a hint of guilt. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I nodded, sat down, caught the waiter's eye, and smiled the most neutral smile I had. The smile of a man who had no intention of ruining the evening, or who understood that the evening was about to be ruined for him. The menu was thick, heavy. It reminded me of a divorce agreement. I almost smiled at that thought, but stopped myself. Sarcasm was safer when it stayed inside. We ordered wine. Deirdre chose it like she wasn't drinking it. She was issuing a command. Glenn didn't argue. He rarely did. That was why he lost the small battles. At first, everything was fine. Weather, tourists, a new restaurant on the marina. Mallory talked about work, partnerships, campaigns, people who don't understand brand value. She spoke like she lived in a world where every problem could be fixed with the right lighting and enough admiration. I agreed when necessary. Made a joke or two. I knew how to be convenient. Husbands in families like this had to be convenient. But I noticed the details. The way she corrected my tone. The way she didn't look at me when I spoke. The way she redirected the conversation. Whenever it drifted toward anything that made me sound capable, confident, or, God forbid, respected. Then it happened. Not during an argument, not during a fight, not with raised voices or tears. Which was exactly why it was so dangerous. Deirdre asked about our plans, the house, the future, the kind of question that sounds like concern, but is actually a measurement. Mallory didn't hesitate. She smiled slightly, took a sip of wine, and said, calmly, casually, like she was commenting on the weather, "He's okay, but I could have done better." To my face, in front of her parents. For a second, the table went quiet, not shocked. Quiet, curious quiet. The kind where everyone waits to see how much damage will be done and who will clean it up. I felt something shift inside me, not pain, not anger, clarity. I looked at her, really looked, at the perfect hair, the polished confidence, the ease with which she reduced me to a comparison chart, and I said calmly, "You're right." Her smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second, too small for anyone else to notice. I stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically. I placed my napkin on the table, straightened my jacket, caught the waiter's eye, and nodded. "I'll take care of the bill," I said. Glenn looked at me. Then, really looked. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he'd just realized he'd misjudged the room. Mallory opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked relieved, like she'd finally been given permission to stop pretending. As I walked toward the exit, I passed behind her chair. Her phone was face down on the table. The screen lit up for just a second. One name, Dane. I didn't stop, didn't ask questions, didn't turn around. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Through the glass, I saw Mallory laugh softly with her mother, leaning back in her chair like a woman who had just won something. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't the end of my marriage. It was the moment she thought she'd erased me. And people who think you're gone never see you coming. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was calm enough to notice how quiet rage feels when it finally finds a shape. I sat in the car for a moment without starting the engine. Harbor Club glowed behind me like a stage set after the actors leave, still beautiful, still lying. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't look. I already knew who it was. When I finally drove home, the streets were almost empty, the kind of empty that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I let the silence sit with me. I didn't turn on music. Music would have tried to tell me how to feel, and I didn't need instructions. At home, I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and took off my jacket. Slowly, like speed might break something I was still examining. The house smelled clean, neutral, a hotel smell. Mallory had always liked it that way, nothing too personal, nothing that suggested someone lived here instead of passed through. I went to the kitchen and noticed the first thing I'd missed for weeks, a valet ticket, folded once, tucked carelessly beside the fruit bowl like it had landed there by accident. Wrong night, wrong lot. Harborview Garage. Tuesday. Tuesday was supposed to be late client meetings. Tuesday was supposed to be boring. I picked it up, didn't rush. Paper doesn't lie, it just waits for someone to read it correctly. I didn't confront her. That's what people do when they're still hoping to be talked out of reality. I put the ticket back exactly where it had been and went upstairs. My phone buzzed again. Mallory. Running late. Don't wait up. I smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I showered, let the water hit my face until thoughts slowed down enough to line up. By the time I lay in bed, I wasn't angry. Anger burns too fast. I was interested. The next morning I went to work early. The hotel was quiet at that hour. The kind of quiet that belongs to staff, not guests. Cleaning carts rolled softly over carpet. Lights came on in sections. A controlled wake-up. This was my world. Operations, logistics, the invisible spine that keeps pretty places standing upright. Nina was already in the office when I walked in, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. She looked up and raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone said something stupid at dinner," she said. "I had fish," I replied. It was overconfident. She snorted and went back to her screen. Nina had the gift of knowing when not to push. That was why I trusted her more than most people. I checked the day's schedule, vendor walkthroughs, security briefings, event confirmations. Then I saw the name that made everything click into place so cleanly, it almost felt polite. Mercer Creative Group, Ballroom A, full buyout. Lead contact, Mallory H. I didn't react. I learned a long time ago that reactions are what people remember. Notes are what actually matter. "Hey," Nina said casually, still not looking at me. "That agency guy, Dane Mercer, you know him?" I pretended to think. "Seen him around," she made a face. "Yeah, that tracks." "How so?" She finally looked up. "Let's just say he has a reputation for treating boundaries like suggestions. And when things get messy, they get strategically cleaned." I filed that away, carefully. Later. That afternoon, while reviewing vendor access logs, I checked something I was technically allowed to check: our shared household calendar. The one Mallory had set up years ago and then forgotten about once her phone became her whole life. Tuesday night. Client drinks, Harborview. No last name, no details, just enough to look innocent. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. This wasn't sloppiness. This was confidence. Confidence comes right before people make mistakes. That evening, Mallory came home. Late. Quiet. Slipped into bed without turning on the light. Her hand brushed my arm like muscle memory trying to pass for affection. "You still awake?" she whispered. "Mm-hmm." "Sorry about last night." There it was. Not what I said. Not "are you okay?" Just sorry. Like apologizing to furniture. "It's fine," I said. She relaxed instantly. That was the tell. People only relax when they think they've won. She fell asleep quickly. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, thinking about Dane Mercer and how men like him always assume the quiet guy isn't dangerous. At work, the next day, an internal email landed in my inbox. Subject: Final confirmation. Mercer Creative Gala. I read it once. Then again. Mallory was listed as on-site lead. Dane as executive oversight. I closed the email and smiled to myself, because affairs are personal. But this was structural, and structures collapse best when you remove them in public. I looked at the calendar. 10 days until the gala, plenty of time, and that's when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, a single text. "You need to stay in your lane." No name, no signature, just a threat disguised as advice. I locked my screen, stood up, and walked toward the ballroom. For the first time since dinner, I felt something like anticipation. Because whoever sent that message had just confirmed one very important thing. They were watching me, and people who watch you closely make even better mistakes. The first time I saw them together. In daylight, I understood why she thought this was an upgrade. Dane Mercer had that kind of face, symmetrical enough to trust, relaxed enough to seem dangerous, only when he wanted to be. He wore his confidence like a tailored jacket, not flashy, just expensive, in ways you had to recognize to appreciate. They were standing in Ballroom A during the walkthrough. Mallory held a tablet. Dane leaned in slightly too close, one hand braced on the back of a chair like he owned the space, like he owned her proximity. I didn't interrupt. People reveal more when they think you're background noise. "Lighting needs to hit the center tables first," Dane said. "Faces matter more than food." Mallory nodded immediately. "Of course, I'll adjust the flow." She said "I'll," but he'd decided already. That was the rhythm. Him leading, her translating, her believing it made her important. I watched from the edge of the room, arms crossed, expression neutral. Operations, people learn to look boring. It keeps you invisible. Nina drifted up beside me. "That him?" "Dane," I said. "Yes." She exhaled through her nose. "Figures." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Her tone said enough. As the walkthrough continued, Evelyn Sloan joined us near the stage. She was the kind of woman who didn't rush and didn't apologize for it. Early 40s, sharp eyes, calm posture. She ran event production for half the high-end venues, along the coast, which meant she'd seen every version of male ego there was. "Morning," she said to me, offering her hand. "Your operations, right?" "Unfortunately," I replied, "I make sure nothing interesting happens." She smiled. A real one. That's my favorite kind of person. We spoke briefly about load-in schedules and vendor timelines. Clean, professional, no games. I felt my shoulders drop without realizing they'd been tense. Behind us, Dane laughed loudly at something Mallory said. Too loud, the kind of laugh that needs witnesses. I turned slightly and caught a snippet as they passed. "If anything goes sideways," Dane said, voice low, casual, "you handle it. You're the face." Mallory hesitated, just a fraction, then smiled again. Of course. There it was. Not love, not passion. Assignment. I felt something click into place, not anger, understanding. Later, Nina pulled me aside near the service corridor. "You didn't hear this from me," she said. "But we've had situations with him at other events. Nothing illegal, just enough that everyone knows to keep witnesses around. Reported? Filed? Buried? He's good at framing things as misunderstandings." Of course he was. That afternoon, Mallory passed me in the hallway. She slowed, just a bit. "We should talk tonight," she said. "About?" "Us." I looked at her. Really looked. At the confidence, the distance, the way she already expected me to be on defense. "Sure," I said. "We should." Her phone buzzed. She checked it instantly, smiled without meaning to. Dane. She walked away without another word. That evening, as I reviewed the final pre-event reports, Nina dropped a folder on my desk. "Old incident logs," she said. "Venue-to-venue stuff. Like I said, nothing criminal, but patterns matter." She left before I could thank her. I opened the folder slowly. Dates, names, notes, written in careful, liability-avoiding language, and always the same shape to it. Dane arrives, boundaries blur, someone else absorbs the fallout. I closed the folder and leaned back. This was bigger than an affair. This was a man who used people like shock absorbers, and Mallory had just volunteered to be one. My phone lit up. "Mallory. Can you come home early tonight?" I typed back one word. "Why?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. I shut down my computer, grabbed my jacket, and headed toward the elevator. Because when someone suddenly wants to talk after weeks of distance, it's never about honesty. It's about control slipping. And control, once it starts to slip, falls fast. The first crack appeared on a Wednesday evening, and it was small enough that most people would have missed it. The pre-event reception was meant to be quiet. Soft opening, limited guest list, sponsors, planners, a few local names who liked to feel important before everyone else arrived. Ballroom lights dimmed low, staff moving like shadows, music low enough to encourage secrets. I was on the floor, not because I needed to be, but because I wanted to watch how power behaved when it thought no one important was looking. Dane arrived late. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Men like him don't rush. They make other people adjust. He came in smiling, jacket over one shoulder, phone to his ear, laughing loudly enough for people to turn and notice. Mallory met him. Halfway across the room, like gravity pulled her there. He didn't see me at first. That was the best part. He headed toward the side entrance instead of the main doors. The red-striped curb outside was clearly marked. Fire lane, no parking, no exceptions. The signs were big, reflective, impossible to miss, unless you believe rules are decorative. He left his car there anyway. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I simply walked toward Omar, our security lead, and spoke quietly. "Red-striped lane outside Ballroom B," I said. "Unattended vehicle." Omar didn't ask whose. He just nodded. Policy was policy. That's why it worked. 5 minutes later, I heard the raised voice. "What do you mean, towed?" Dane stormed back inside, phone in hand, face tight with confusion. Turning to anger, he looked around until his eyes landed on me. There it was. Recognition, then calculation. "You," he said, approaching too fast, too close. "Did you do this?" I met his gaze calmly. "Do what?" "My car. You parked in a fire lane. So? So it gets towed." He laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. "I think it's standard. People were watching now, not staring, pretending not to, the best kind of audience." "This is ridiculous," he said, lowering his voice. "Fix it." "I can't," I replied. "I don't control tow companies. I did control whether or not." He got escorted when he stepped past the rope into a restricted service corridor. Omar appeared at my side instantly. "Sir," Omar said, calm and loud enough to be heard, You can't be back here. Dane tried to push past him, not hard, just enough to assert dominance. Big mistake. Hands went on shoulders, firm, professional, no violence, just physics and policy. Let go of me, Dane snapped. Sir, Omar repeated, you're going to need to step outside. Mallory watched from the edge of the room. Her face wasn't angry. It was afraid. That's when I knew this was working. Dane was walked out through the side doors, not dragged, not thrown, just guided like a problem that had been identified and removed. Cameras flashed outside. As guests pretended to check their phones, I stayed inside, because the person who wins never needs to follow. Later that night, Mallory found me near the service bar. What was that? She whispered. Parking enforcement, I said. This isn't a joke. No, I agreed. It isn't. She studied my face like she was searching for anger and finding none. That made her uncomfortable. He has influence, she said carefully. So does gravity. She left without responding. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. Unknown number. You embarrassed the wrong person last night. I didn't reply. I went to work early again. By midday, Nina slipped into my office and closed the door. Word travels fast, she said. Agency side is agitated. About? About you. I looked up. That's new. She hesitated. There's talk of reassigning Mallory after the gala, quietly, framing it as a leadership adjustment. I leaned back in my chair. They were moving pieces, just not fast enough. That evening, Mallory tried again. She cooked dinner, real food, sat across from me instead of beside, a classic reset attempt. He's under a lot of pressure, she said carefully. This gala matters. I know, I replied. He can be intense, but he's fair. I met her eyes. Is he? She looked down at her plate. That was answer enough. 2 days later, I sat across from Patrice Wynne in a neutral conference room with glass walls and no personality. She was external HR, brought in when companies wanted distance from their own decisions. I'm not filing a complaint, I told her. I'm asking about protocol. Protocol exists to protect institutions, she replied, not feelings. I understand, I said. What happens when a venue documents repeated boundary violations by a client representative? She considered me for a moment. Then the venue has grounds to terminate partnership. And if that representative has been positioning a subordinate as the public face? Her pen paused. That, she said slowly, would look like risk transfer. I nodded. That night, Mallory came home shaking. He says if anything comes out, I'll be the one everyone looks at, she said. That I approved things, that I smiled for cameras. I watched her carefully. This was the moment where a softer man would have comforted her. I wasn't that man anymore. So, I said, he's throwing you first. She looked at me like she'd just realized she'd been standing on thin ice the whole time. I need you, she whispered. I stood up. No, I said calmly. You needed me before. I walked past her, grabbed my jacket, and left. Because the gala was 3 days away, and everything that falls in public. By the time the gala day arrived, everyone was smiling too hard. That's always how you can tell when something is about to break. The lobby was alive before sunrise, floral deliveries, lighting crews, audio checks echoing through marble and glass, everyone moving with purpose, pretending they weren't nervous. Big nights expose small lies. I was reviewing final access lists when Nina appeared at my door without knocking. She didn't sit. He's asking for you, she said. Dane, she nodded. Conference room C says it's urgent. Of course it was. I took my time walking there. Urgency is a currency. Men like him. Try to spend early. He was standing when I entered, jacket off, sleeves rolled, smile ready, but eyes sharp. Appreciate you coming, he said. I wanted to clear the air. I sat down without responding. You made me look bad, he continued, as if this were a shared problem. I don't like surprises. Then you should read signs, I said. They're usually posted. His smile tightened. You're overstepping. Am I? He leaned forward, too close again. Your operations. Stay there. Personal issues don't belong in business. I met his eyes, calm, steady. Then you should have kept them personal. Silence stretched. He straightened slowly. You know, he said, people in your position tend to overestimate their leverage. And people in yours, I replied, tend to forget how many witnesses they create. That landed. He left, without shaking my hand. 2 hours later, Patrice Wynne walked into the building. External, neutral, unimpressed by titles. We met in a glass-walled office overlooking the ballroom. Below us, staff moved like pieces on a board. I've been briefed, she said. This is a documentation review, not an accusation. Of course, I replied. She laid out the timeline calmly. Incidents, complaints, statements carefully worded by people who didn't want to be the first one to speak. This pattern, she said, tapping the folder, doesn't become actionable until someone tries to shift blame. I didn't smile. He already has. Her eyes lifted. Then this will escalate quickly. As she left, my phone buzzed. Mallory, please don't do this today. I typed nothing back. By evening, the press arrived. Lights, cameras, smiles that meant nothing. Evelyn met me. Near the entrance, dressed simply, confidently. No need to compete with the room. You look like someone who's already decided something, she said. I have, I replied. She took my arm without asking. Not possessive, supportive. The difference matters. Inside, Mallory stood near the stage, perfect as ever, but her eyes kept finding me, measuring distance, calculating loss. Dane took the mic, early, too early. He smiled at the crowd, thanked sponsors, spoke about integrity, then slid it in smoothly. Recent internal matters remind us that accountability starts with the people who represent us. Mallory froze. That was his move. I stepped forward before the silence could settle. Actually, I said calmly, the venue would like to address something. Murmurs replied, cameras shifted. Patrice appeared at my side, folder in hand, authority in her stillness. Effective immediately, she said clearly. This venue is terminating its partnership with Mercer Creative due to documented conduct violations by its executive representative. Dane turned toward me, face flushed. This is a setup, he snapped. He moved toward the control booth. Fast. Security reacted faster, hands on arms, firm, blocking, not violent, final. Let me go, he shouted. Flashes exploded. Guests backed away. The room leaned in. Patrice continued, unmoved. Additionally, evidence indicates an attempt to position a subordinate as a liability buffer. That will be included in the report. Mallory looked at Dane then. Really looked. He didn't look back. They guided him toward the exit. Outside, the valet lane was chaos. Cameras, staff, guests, pretending this was entertainment. Dane spun toward me, one last time, rage naked on his face. This isn't over, he said. I stepped close enough for only him to hear. It is for you. His car was gone, towed hours earlier, legally, logged. He stood under the lights with nothing but his phone and a reputation, collapsing in real time. Mallory's father appeared beside her, his voice low, furious, not at me, at her. I took Evelyn's hand and walked away. Because when a man thinks he's erased you, he never imagines you'll be the one writing the final report. The crowd didn't disperse right away. They never do when something expensive breaks in public. People pretended to check messages, pretended to look for drinks, pretended this wasn't the most interesting thing that had happened to them all year. The band didn't know whether to play or stop. The lights stayed bright, indifferent to human dignity. Mallory stood frozen near the stage, her perfect posture finally failing her. Glenn was at her side. Now, his hand not comforting, just containing, like he was afraid she might say something that could still make it worse. Dane was pushed toward the exit again, this time louder, messier. He tried to turn it into theater. "This is what happens when you let personal vendettas run businesses," he shouted, making sure the cameras heard him. "Jealous husbands, small men with clipboards." Some people laughed nervously. Most didn't. I didn't respond. That's the thing about control. You don't need to defend it. It shows. He tried one last angle as they reached the doors, twisted his neck back toward the crowd. "She knew," he said loudly, pointing at Mallory. "She signed off on everything." Mallory flinched, like he'd slapped her. I stepped forward. Then, not fast, not angry, just enough to be seen. "That's not true," I said. The room quieted in a way that felt heavy. I held up my phone. Not a recording, not anything illegal, just a time-stamped voice memo Mallory had made weeks ago and forgotten to delete. A note she'd recorded in our kitchen, thinking she was alone. Dane says, "If anything goes bad, I'll be the face. That's how these things work." I didn't play the whole thing. I didn't need to. Patrice spoke instead, calm, clinical, final. "The attempt to pre-assign responsibility is noted. The venue's position is clear." Dane lunged forward, then, not at me, at the control booth, at the lights, at anything that might stop the story from finishing itself. Security took him harder this time, still clean, still legal, but there was no mistaking it now. He was being removed. Cameras went wild. Glenn finally spoke, his voice cutting through everything. "Mallory, enough." She looked at him like a child who'd just realized the ground was gone. I didn't wait to see what she'd say. Outside, the night had turned cold. The valet lane was still lit like a crime scene. Dane stood near the curb, jacket in his hands, shouting into his phone at someone who wasn't answering. No car, no audience, no power. He saw me and took a step forward. "Say it," he spat. "You think you won?" I stopped a few feet away, close enough for him to see there was nothing left in my face to take. "This was never about winning," I said quietly. "It was about ending." He tried to step past me. Omar's hand landed on his chest, firm, final. Behind me, inside the building, I heard Mallory cry out. Not my name, not his, her father's. I didn't turn around. Evelyn's hand found mine again, steady, real, no performance. We walked past the cameras, past the whispering guests, past a man who'd built his life on other people absorbing the impact for him. The doors closed behind us, and for the first time all night, the noise stopped. Right there. That's where it ended.